get going in about 2 minutes. Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. We're totally thrilled for Crossroads to be hosting an evening for parents of tweens and teens and young adults on the topics of screens and mental health. Just a word or two about Crossroads. As many of you know, many of you may not know, Crossroads is an organization here in Jerusalem serving English-speaking teens and young adults in Jerusalem and really all over Israel. We offer a number of services. You know, right now I'm here in our offices where there's play practice going on for our theater program, and they'll be performing at the Khan Theater at the end of August. Tomorrow night, we're having our ceremony for our summer teen apprenticeship program. Throughout the year, we offer free individual therapy. We have a crisis hotline, as per the sign behind me, for teens and young adults, 050 hotline. And we offer really many creative arts programs and therapeutic programs here in our offices in Jerusalem and in Beit Shemesh. I'm so thrilled to be able to offer this evening. A number of years back, Crossroads was seeing fewer therapy clients, and we had a very busy drop-in center. And, you know, I was trying to figure out, those numbers began to switch where we were seeing an uptick in therapy cases. And, you know, the numbers in our drop-in center went down. And I had a very difficult time trying to figure it out until about 2017, 18. I read Professor Twenge's article in The Atlantic, you know, have smartphones destroyed a generation. And it really gave so much insight as to the behaviors of teens and how they've changed. And it really impacted the way we run our program here at Crossroads. So we have deep appreciation to Dr. Twenge. But in particular, we also saw it, you know, alongside our crisis intervention and alongside the therapy uptick, we saw a major mental health crisis going on, and we saw it began to grow. And a lot of Professor Twenge's research also gave insight to that. So without further ado, you know, we're just really thrilled that Professor Twenge is here. And the way this evening is going to work is I'm going to ask questions and Professor Twenge will respond. As I said, I'm very open to anyone asking, sending questions either to me or to Nechama Levi, who I also wanted to just acknowledge. The evening couldn't have happened without Nechama's you know, help from, you know, every step of the way, inviting people, registering people, and making sure everyone got here tonight. So thank you, Nechama. Okay, to start off the evening, Professor Twenge, can you give an overview of the mental health impact from, let's say, from the point where, you know, most of the population had smartphones on teens and young adults?
Yeah, so, you know, I've been doing this work on generational differences for a long time, and I got used to seeing changes in mental health that would roll out.
Are you able to speak a little bit louder?
Sure, I can try. So I've been doing this work on generational differences for a long time, and I got used to seeing changes that were big, but, you know, they would take a decade or two to get there. Then in the data from teens around, you know, 2011 or 2012, I started to see changes that were bigger and more sudden. So more teens started to say that they felt left out, that they felt lonely, that they felt like they couldn't do anything right. that they felt like their lives were not useful. Then before long, I started to see data that clinical level depression was increasing by quite a bit, and that kept going. In fact, teen depression in the US doubled between 2011 and 2019, so before the pandemic. Then we started to see international data come out too, that around the world, more and more teens are saying that they felt lonely, that they felt more anxiety. So that, of course, begs the question of why? Why was there such a sudden change, around 2012? As you said, that is around the time that most people got smartphones. It's also when social media use among teens moved from optional to virtually mandatory. And when Facebook bought Instagram, when phones started to have front-facing cameras, a lot of those things coalesced in the early 2010s. And as a result, teens started spending a lot more time online, a lot less time with each other in person, and less time sleeping. And those three trends are a very negative formula for mental health. So I think it is not at all a coincidence that teen depression and anxiety and loneliness started to spike right at the time there were these changes in how teens spent their time outside of school. You're on mute, Robbie.
You mentioned that teens started spending much less time together in person. Could you zoom in, no pun intended, we're on Zoom, but could you zoom in as to what impacts, like really specific impacts you think that had, that less time socializing and engaging physically and in person?
Yeah, so we really see this across the board. So there's been, some discussion about the teens don't have as many third spaces to beat up. Sounds like you have a space for that, which is great. But it goes beyond that. It even when you ask young people about just hanging out informally, which can be done at home, that has gone down. So it's not just that they're not hanging out in third spaces. They're also not going to parties. They're not hanging out with each other informally. Just anything that focuses on them getting together with friends in person, that has gone down. And when you look at what that means for mental health and happiness, it's really clear teens who spend more time with friends in person are less likely to be lonely, less likely to be depressed, less likely to be unhappy. And those who spend more time on social media and other screen time, it's the opposite. For example, the more hours a day a teen spends on social media, the more likely it is that he or she will be depressed. So teens now are spending more time on activities linked to unhappiness and depression and less time on activities that instead have mental health benefits.
So how would you explain how that works though? Because in principle, I'm on WhatsApp or I'm on Facebook and I'm engaging with, friends, maybe even people who are really friends, not make-believe friends. How does that work? How does one translate to the other?
Yeah, well, put simply, they're not the same. And if you think about what the experience is like communicating with people on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, it's very different from communicating with someone in person where they're right there in front of you.
Right. Okay.
You're
Now
not seeing the look on someone else's face. It's just different. It is not emotionally fulfilling.
Right. Right. We were talking a little bit earlier about were there any you said there was a number of, you've studied a number of changes that have happened. Not, in terms of like adult activities. And how has adult activities changed for a teen or a young adult, with the onset of everyone having a smartphone?
Yes, this is another set of changes, and they began before the smartphone, but they're accelerated by the smartphone. That in here I don't have as much international data, but I know that in some ways these trends apply internationally as well. But at least here in the US, teens today are much less likely to have a driver's license, to go out on dates, to have a paid job when they're a teen, to drink alcohol. So these changes started like in the late 90s, but then they accelerated in the early 2010s in the age of the smartphone. So that's partially because when you're communicating online, then it doesn't feel quite as necessary to go out of the house and do these things. But it goes beyond that. It's a deeper trend that is known in psychology as the slow life strategy. So that the developmental trajectory slows down at every stage of the life cycle. Children are less independent, teens are less likely to do these adult things. Young adults marry later and have children later and settle into careers later. And middle-aged people look and feel younger than their parents or grandparents did at the same age. This is rooted in technological change, not just smartphones, but even more things like people living longer and better medical care, and also education taking longer to finish in a more technologically complex society. So that's more broad ranging, and it clearly has some benefits as well. You know, it's a good thing that we don't have as many teens who are drinking alcohol, for example. There's even some benefits to not as many of them having a driver's license because they're less likely to get in car accidents and things like that. If they're not going out of the house as much, then some of those accidents that can occur are less likely. However, teens might be more physically safe in those ways, but they're more mentally vulnerable because at this developmental stage, they're meant to be spending time with each other in person.
Right. What would you say would be the biggest red flags to look out for? If you were talking to a parent, which you are, what would you say would be the biggest red flags to look out for in terms of their kids' health? For teens, tweens, young adults who spend a considerable amount of time on social media and on their phones.
Yeah, well, screen time is a reality of modern life. Technology is a reality of modern life. So there's two components that we usually look at. So one is time spent. So is your teen spending, an hour or two a day, maybe on WhatsApp and social media, particularly if they're 16 or older? That is pretty reasonable. But if they're younger, that's a whole other discussion. We can get into that later. So there's that piece, but then there's also the piece of what are they doing? And if they're texting with their friends, fine. But if they're spending hours and hours and hours a day on an app like TikTok or even Instagram, where most of what they're consuming is not about communicating with friends, it's more about influencer content and just watching videos for hours and hours, that's a different scenario, especially if it's starting to interfere with sleep or starting to interfere with seeing friends in person.
You mentioned a few moments ago that teens, in many ways, are less rebellious. Can you explain that? And in what areas do you think, statistically speaking, they are less, and in what areas are they not less? Because I guess rebelliousness shows itself in different ways.
It does, for sure. And I always, when I'm asked about that, I always want to point out that my editor put that part in the subtitle. It wasn't really entirely my idea, because it is true. It depends on what context you're referring to. So less rebellious in that they're very focused on safety, both physical safety and what they call emotional safety. So in that way, compared to, previous groups of teens where, they would go for a joyrides or maybe get in a bunch of trouble. Gen Z just doesn't get into as much trouble when they're teens. So some of it is because they're more likely to be staying at home rather than going out. But just in general, they are much more focused on safety than previous generations. And that's what they say about themselves, not just what older people have observed. However, each generation does have its own focuses that, older generations don't always understand. And for Gen Z, some of that is, around spending a lot of time online, which a lot of older generations are not sure of. The interesting thing is younger generations aren't so sure that's a good idea either. There's an increasing number of organizations founded by young adults that have been advocating for more regulation around social media. There's also surveys showing that a large percentage of teens and young adults wish that TikTok had never been invented, which I think is really telling.
Right. All right. Thank you. Maybe the most important thing that you can offer us as parents of tweens, teens, young adults, could you offer us as parents, let's say, five tips, five practical things that a parent can do to make sure their kid is as healthy as possible living in this world of technology and screens?
Absolutely. And just to put this in context, I have 3 children myself, 3 daughters. They are 17, 14, and 12. So this is my day-to-day life as well as my research life. So partially for that reason, and partially because this is the question I get all the time, and it's the most important question, what can we do? That's actually going to be my next book. We're still working on a title. It might be called Future-Proof Parenting. I want to call it 10 Rules because that's what we need, right? We need these bite-sized, what do I do now? So I'll share 5 of those. My number 1 is no devices in the bedroom overnight. So no iPads, no phones in the bedroom overnight. And that's because there's really solid research on how that interferes with sleep. It's also just too tempting. It's too tempting for teens to stay up late on the phone. That's probably why sleep deprivation has increased since 2012. And sleep is absolutely crucial for physical and for mental health. Sleep deprivation is one of the biggest risk factors for anxiety and depression and self-harm. So we can preserve sleep time. That's an enormous step forward. And by the way, this is for an adults too. Don't have that phone in the bedroom overnight if you can possibly help it. The usual question I get from this is, but wait, I have to have my phone in my bedroom overnight because it's my alarm clock. I have some advice for you. Buy an alarm clock. You can buy it. They're pretty cheap these days. You can buy it on your phone and then, put your phone away and get a good night's sleep. So that's my number 1.
That's number 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So another is for younger children and for teens, try to put off giving them a phone, any phone, for as long as possible. And then when they're at the stage where, okay, they may need a phone, until they're 16, it should not be a smartphone. It should be, I hear that you have one called from Japan, OAI, that type of phone where you can just do WhatsApp. Or a old-fashioned flip phone. So something where maybe they can text their friends or use WhatsApp to contact their friends, but no social media and no internet access. So my youngest 2 children have this type of phone. Here in the US, there's brands like Gab and Pinwheel and TrueMe that do that. And they're Android phones that just are locked down and they just don't have any ability to install social media apps or web browsers. So in that way, then that's a compromised position. So you're not giving them a full-blown smartphone. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 is no social media until 16. I actually think this should be the law. We have very little regulation around social media right now in most countries. Age isn't verified. So just do everything you can as a parent to try to keep them off social media until they are 16. Yeah, it's challenging because parental permission is required, because age isn't verified, but giving them the phone, that doesn't allow social media is at least one step in the right direction. And have that conversation with your kids about the more productive ways to spend their time and how they have many other ways that they can communicate with their friends. It doesn't have to be social media, and that social media is such a time sink, and that these companies are making money off of our time and attention. Teens love the idea of like adult conspiracies, and this one actually is one because you are the product when you're using social media, and that's a great conversation to have with your kids. All right, so that's 3. 4, is once you give them that smartphone, put parental controls on it. So even though our oldest is almost 18, we still have the control on her phone that she needs us to approve her downloading apps. So then if she wants social media or she wants some other app, it's a conversation rather than her unilateral in the moment decision. And you can also have parental controls shut the phone down at bedtime and put limits on social media apps. If they're 16 and you're like, okay, you can have Snapchat, but I'm going to give you an hour a day to use it so it doesn't get out of hand. Then the last one relates to that slow life strategy and teens doing adult things and getting together with each other in person. If we're going to limit phone access, we're going to limit time online and limit social media, it has to be replaced with something. And a lot of teens today don't know what to do with themselves other than doing social media or spending time, on the phone. So we have to give them those spaces to get together in person. We have to make sure that they have real world freedom, that we are allowing them to, do some things on their own. And that's for kids too, to just and have that playtime. That's really, really essential that we have other things for them to do.
Okay, thank you. Let's say I wasn't asking you to speak to parents, but I was asking you to speak to teens or tweens, themselves. Would you offer any different practical tips or tools than what you would say to parents?
Yeah, many of them are very similar. And when I speak to tweens and teens, I actually give pretty similar a pretty similar presentation to what I give to their parents. I pare it down a little bit, I frame it differently, but I show them the same data on the increases in loneliness and depression and the links between depression and spending a lot of time online versus spending time with friends in person. But I do think it's important to frame it in a way that isn't shaming and isn't judgmental, and just thinking about ways to use your time. I love the point about that the companies are making money off your time and attention. I just one point that is fun to make is asking them, okay, how many of you I mean, this app may, which app may vary, from one place to another, but I often ask you, how many of you use Snapchat? How many of you keep up snap streaks with your friends? And that's usually almost everybody who does Snapchat. And I say, how many do you really like snap streaks? And very few of them do. It's the addict's narrative of they do it, and they feel like they have to, but they don't actually enjoy it. And then I also sometimes say, well, who do you think came up with snap streaks? You give somebody your age, oh, this is a great way to make sure people keep in touch with their friends every day. No, it was some tech bro in Silicon Valley who wanted his bonus and probably got it.
Got it. Okay. A question about we spoke about a lot about social media. What about teens who are spending oodles of time, or tweens, but not exclusively, on their phone, but on different apps, not social media, not socialization, but just playing games. And playing games,
Mm-hmm.
Is the data the same? Is there any difference between the impact of social media versus the impact of just being on apps and games?
Yeah, so that's one place where some of the data disagrees. I had a paper a couple of years ago showing that the link between screen time and depression differed depending on what people were doing. So that link to depression was much stronger for more hours on social media and general internet access than it was for TV and for gaming. In more recent data sets, it doesn't look like that's the case. It looks like watching videos and gaming is almost as strongly correlated with unhappiness and depression as social media time is. And I think that's because the lines are blurring. I mean, particularly for videos, because it's TikTok videos or is it social media? It's both, and it's algorithmic in the way that it feeds people, what the app thinks they want to see, and is very powerful in that way. So I think that's part of that reason. And then with gaming, I think it depends on how much time, whether that's at a reasonable level, and then also how it's done, because a lot of young people, especially boys and young men, will play games with their friends, and it's in real time and it's more socially interactive. And that's different from, playing a individual game on the phone. So I think it depends a little bit on exactly what they're doing. In any case, anything more than about 3 hours a day needs to be limited, because then it's going to start to interfere with other more beneficial activities.
Okay. Okay, there was a question about WhatsApp. Let's say someone, either a teen or a young adult, didn't have any other apps that, but they spent, a lot of time on WhatsApp. And I guess WhatsApp, with their statuses and stuff, it's become a form of social media. But just what about just, chatting in groups? And do you see that as the same as Facebook and Instagram? Do you see that WhatsApp as different? And what guidance would you have for parents about WhatsApp in particular?
Yeah. And I'll give the caveat at the outset that I don't have specific data on WhatsApp. It's not used as much in the US, and that's most of the data sets that I'm working with.
We're
They do
crazy
ask about
WhatsApp in Israel.
Yeah, no, and I know that's true in Europe and a lot of other countries as well. I've seen that. And there's some overlap with texting, but as you said, it could be considered social media, so it's a little bit different. I mean, I think the general rule is just everything in moderation. And, there's going to be some differences. For example, kids on the autism spectrum may not be as comfortable interacting with people in person. So, texting may be a good outlet for them. On the other hand, they probably need some in-person interaction too. They're going to need that, for their future lives. So, I think everything has to be in moderation. Everything has to have some sort of limit on it. And, texting with friends, is that better than, watching endless hours on TikTok? Yes. But if that WhatsApp usage is, getting to be, 4 or 5 or more hours a day, and then it's interfering with sleep, and it's interfering with family life, and it's interfering with getting together with friends in person or with homework, yeah, then you got to think about putting limits on that. And also, trying to see, is there a way to get those groups together in person? So if they're having a group chat on WhatsApp, can we get those kids together in person instead? Is that an option?
Right. Okay, I'm going to ask 2 questions. I'm not sure you can help me here, but it was asked to us. A parent wants to encourage their kids to do other things, but they're so bored and they don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
What do you suggest? They do when they can't manage to either find people to get together. Like, do you have any guidance of what would be a next step? Okay, we put limitations into place. Now there's all this extra time. You suggest to do other things, but
Yes,
I think that process itself is a little bit of a challenge.
it can be. So there's some great resources online with the Let Grow project. So Lenore Skenazy, a mom in New York, several years ago, let her 9-year-old boy take the subway by himself, and wrote a column about it, and got some support, but also a lot of pushback. She wrote a book called Free Range Kids, and now heads this project called Let Grow. And that website has a bunch of resources that parents and others can download about what can you do if you're not on a screen, and what can you do to develop independence. So
what's the name of the website?
It's Let Grow, LETGROW. So letgrow.org. And that has a lot of, and she's got a fantastic sense of humor too. So I love the way that she words things. You know, she'll say like, you know, play frisbee, play golf, play frisbee golf, you know, you know, in your backyard garden or wherever you are. And, you know, things about learn how to cook. You know, just she's got this whole list of activities that you can choose from. And some schools have even incorporated her challenges of, you know, kids learning how to do things on their own. What's good about that is it not only replaces the screen, it also builds independence and real world freedom in a way that a lot of kids are now lacking. So college faculty like me, we see this all the time. We get kids coming in who just haven't made decisions on their own. You know, not only have they not interact with people in person, they melt down when they have to just do anything on their own or make any kind of decision. Student affairs staff at universities talk about this all the time, that they see more and more students who can't make even simple decisions without texting their parents, who have never done their own laundry, who have never, you know, even things, there's just an increasing number of say 14 and 15-year-olds who have never gone into a store and bought something for themselves. So anything that can build that kind of independence as well as being a replacement for the screen is great.
I'd like to ask, what I consider a little bit of an elephant in the room, as it's an event now for adults about kids. You know, what role does modeling you know, play here? I'm definitely not, personally, I'm not a great role model when it comes to, you know, being on my phone. Now I'm doing work, I'm doing important things but still, I'm very attached to it, and I'd imagine that many adults and parents are, and I'd be curious, maybe to start off with, what impact that modeling has. And secondly, do you have any advice for parents, and how they relate to the smartphones?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what I like to call digital hypocrisy.
Again,
That digital hypocrisy,
right.
right? So yeah, I mean, just like back in the day when you had the parent who was smoking a cigarette telling their kids not to smoke. Well, same thing. If you're on your phone all the time, then that's probably not going to go that well, telling your teen to have better limits. So the thing is, there are mental health benefits to putting limits on phones for everybody, not just for teens. That piece about no phones in the bedroom overnight is a great example. That needs to be the rule for everybody, unless you have an unusual situation, you're on call, something else. No phones in the bedroom. And you do that, and then your kids do that as well. Overall, just having certain times when you're not on your phone, again, if at all possible. It is tough for adults sometimes if, you know, we're working, we're adults, we have responsibilities. But, you know, if you're having a conversation with the family, you're having a family dinner, that needs to be a no phone zone. And that needs to be for everybody, you know, not just the teens, but the adults as well. So I do think role modeling is very important, that it would be beneficial for all of us, you know, parents or not, to have better boundaries around phones. And then if you have teens in particular, that's another benefit, because teens can smell hypocrisy kilometers away. They are very aware when somebody's telling them to do something that that person doesn't do themselves.
Okay. I have a question here. Someone has a 24-year-old who basically spends all day in their room. You know, let's say young adults, spends all day in their room. They come out to grab some food, and, you know, do you have any like very intense situation? Do you have any suggestions or advice for parents?
So it's a lot tougher once they're adults, of course. I mean, I think that question really comes down to more basic, you know, parenting philosophy. Does this person have a job? Would be one of my first questions. And if so, if they are otherwise a responsible adult and they're contributing to the household, you know, with household chores or cooking or shopping or any of those things, and they have a job, if that's how they're choosing to spend their time, well, you can have a conversation about how that might not be healthy, but that may be all you could do for someone who's 24. If they're not contributing to the household and they don't have a job, et cetera, then it becomes more the purview of advice columnists who would probably tell you to start charging them rent and start putting down more tough love.
Right. Okay. Someone's asking about a 15-year-old who has, very, very attached to their phone. Has some limits, but it's 15. It doesn't have a social life. And every time they try and, take it away or give, there's a total breakdown and meltdown.
Right. Right.
What support can you offer, for a scenario like that?
Right. So, and let me, say from the beginning, I know this is tough. This is a tough, area of parenting, but you're not alone. Lots and lots of families are going through this. But you have to stand your ground. And I know that's hard, but it has to be done. So it has to be, you follow these rules, for example, the no phone in the bedroom overnight, that has to be followed. Otherwise you lose the phone completely for 2 days or 3 days or whatever amount of time. And yes, there's going to be a meltdown because they're addicted. I mean, that's the thing that we have to keep in mind is, how this is actually working. The fact that they're having that total breakdown suggests in itself that there's a problem. And so the first day is the hardest, and then it gets better from there. But you have to break that cycle of addiction. It has to be done, because otherwise, then, think about when they're not in your house anymore and how they're going to have to set their own limits, and that's going to be extremely hard if they really have this, what looks to me from the description of addiction. And this is extremely common, that the kids who are really attached to that phone, if you try to set limits, that there's the breakdown. It happens over and over. And I think and I think that's why. I think it's because they can't handle not having it. But one thing that might make it easier is if you can have them go to a camp, either a day camp or an overnight camp that doesn't allow phones, then that helps them learn how to live without it. Or even a school that doesn't allow phones during the school day, then they learn how to spend a certain amount of time without it.
Right. Would you say there's a difference between screen time usage, between calling or FaceTiming people, and texting and social media?
Yes, because calling and FaceTiming is in real time. And then it's building some of those social skills. It's more emotionally fulfilling. It's more one-on-one rather than being performative in the way that social media can sometimes be. Again, if somebody's doing that 8 hours a day, then that's probably replacing actually being in person and sleeping and homework and so on. However, there's clearly going to be a difference between the effects of 3 hours of TikTok versus 3 hours of talking to your best friend on FaceTime.
Right. I'll share something sort of rubs me the wrong way of some people only like talking by video. Is there something is there something, either potentially healthier by talking by video where you see someone versus talking and just having audio? Have you done any thought or research as to the differences between a audio conversation and a video conversation?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific research on it, but clearly there's a difference between seeing someone's face and seeing their facial reactions. That does change the situation. But anything that's in real time, whether that's audio or audio and video, is going to be preferable to something like social media that's more performative and is not in real time.
How does screen use differ for, let's say, tweens, teens, and young adults in its impact on their health?
Yeah. So there's a big study out of the UK looking at social media use in particular. and it's linked to poor well-being, in this case, low life satisfaction. And there's a pretty clear pattern that those links are larger for girls than for boys, and that has shown up across lots and lots and lots of studies. And this study broke it down by specific age groups. And they found that the link between more time on social media, lower life satisfaction, was considerably stronger at younger ages. So 11 and 12 and 13, 14-year-olds in particular, that those who were spending, especially those spending an excessive amount of time, so 5-7 hours or more a day, had very low life satisfaction. And then that curve kind of evened out more as they got to 16, 17, 18 and above. And that research is one reason why I and many others are advocating for the minimum age for social media to be raised to 16.
Because the findings were that 11 and 12-year-olds, say it again?
That there's a stronger link between social media hours and low life satisfaction among the tweens and younger teens.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay. Hold on. Here's a question. I'm going to read it as I got it. Other than conspiracy theory, how do you recommend that parents discuss with kids the detrimental impacts of using their time on their phones? How do you suggest that those conversations go?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it's going to depend somewhat on the kid, but talking about how companies make money off their time and attention is a great place to start. You can also, I'm a very, data empirically oriented person. Discuss that teens who spend more time, the more hours a day they spend on social media are more likely to be depressed. There's also some really great experiments in this area where they randomly assign people to give up or cut back on their social media use. And then after a few weeks, see how they're doing compared to a control group who kept up their normal social media use. Those who cut back or gave up social media and that time less lonely, happier, and less depressed. And I think that you're talking about that of just, in some cases, it doesn't even have to be giving it up, just cutting back. There's a great study with college students where they just cut back on their social media to, I think it was 30 minutes a day, and just putting limits on things. That there's lots of ways to communicate with your friends. And yeah, social media can be fun, but let's limit it to 30 minutes or an hour a day. And then that might be better. One suggestion I've heard that I think it may or may not be successful is having a discussion about, well, how do you feel when you spend an hour on Instagram? Because the tough thing is, what if they say, oh, I feel great, right? And some people will say that because there's variation across people. I had this discussion very recently with 7 undergraduates who are working in my lab this semester or this summer on some research tables. And one of them said, I love TikTok and I feel good after I watch it. And then the other 6 said, no, I had to. And one person said, I had to get rid of TikTok. And I'm now, and I love this phrase. She said, I am 3 years TikTok sober.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I thought that was really impactful. It's because she said it just, I couldn't do it anymore. And another one too, he said, I don't know. I had to get rid of it. So I think for a lot of teens, if you have that conversation about, how does that feel? And like, when you go on it, try to go on it for 5 minutes, do you notice that then 20 minutes will pass and that it's really hard to get off of it? And have you noticed that if you start looking at something negative, it'll show you more and more negative things? Talk to them about what their experience is like, and then talk about how cutting back is maybe a good idea.
You're relating to this topic as somewhat of an addiction, with the sober language. What's your feeling? Is phone addiction the way it impacts, the brain and everything? would you say phone addiction is legit and real, or is it a made up concept?
So I think it is legit. I think it is real. I think that the science is still catching up to that. There's still debate around that. We're getting, though, every day more and more, brain studies um, to try to investigate that. It seems clear that social media and some aspects of just using the phone in general, and that might include WhatsApp, light up the dopamine pathway. So the dopamine pathway lights up for anything that's rewarding. And some people try to discount this by saying, yeah, but it also lights up for food. It lights up for sex. I'm like, that's exactly the point. It's lighting up for anything rewarding. And that's why it can get out of hand, because rewards in the real world are not as accessible or as easy to get as the dopamine that you get from social media. Plus, the companies know this. There's one company out there that's actually called Dopamine Labs, and it helps tech companies light up that pathway and get people to be on the app for as long as possible and coming back as often as possible. When you think about it that way, I think that's pretty clearly addiction, especially given the reaction of people when they have to give it up, that you get the meltdowns, and that it follows the pattern that the first day is hardest, and then it's a little bit better. And then by day 4, that's when you finally start to see the improvement. That's exactly what happens with other types of addictions.
What's interesting is I think that most kids and teens would even acknowledge that it's not healthy for them and that they're not keeping to their own boundaries. You have any thoughts about, a kid who, has their own boundaries? I could do this. I know too much. How would you follow up with them?
Yeah.
Beyond
So,
just, grabbing it for them, or maybe
yeah, there are probably a minority, but there are some kids who can set their own limits, but that's unusual. Maybe a third, something like that. So it's not completely rare, but most kids are going to need help. Most adults need help setting limits on their screen use and their social media use, because these companies have poured billions of dollars into getting as many eyeballs as possible for as long as possible. So that's what we're fighting against. It's really tough to win against that. And even people, adults or teens who can set those limits, sometimes slip because of those challenges. One thing I think we need to think about more is that this is not just an individual problem, it's a group problem. So let's say you have a teen who says, okay, but listen, mom or dad, I really need to be on WhatsApp all the time, because if I don't text my friends back right away, they'll think I'm mad at them. Great. Have that conversation with your friends that you're going to take breaks from your phone from time to time. Blame it on your parents, but just say, if I don't get back to you right away, it doesn't mean I'm mad at you. I need to have some breaks, or my mom is making me take breaks. Whatever explanation, but have that conversation with your friends so you don't feel like you're the only one who's going to be left out, and so on. That's why we need more regulation and group level solutions. Until we have that, I think we have to have these discussions among groups of parents and teens with each other and their groups of friends.
Well, on that top of socialization, I think I may have asked this earlier. I'm just gonna say it again though. A lot of teens will actually be left out of their social group if they're not on WhatsApp and social media. Don't you're not, you said not till 16, but already from 10 and 11 and 12 and 13, much of the social group is on social media. So how do you balance that boundary that you put there with them actually being left out, not knowing when things are happening?
Yeah. So I think it's another conversation that parents and groups of teen and tween friends need to be having, of, how are we going to communicate? And if that communication for, say about when we're going to get together, or things, or, discussing our, group project or whatever, choose a platform. WhatsApp might be the least of the evils, but it should probably not be Instagram.
Right.
The thing is, most of the stickiest social media now is actually not friend communication.
Say again, most
TikTok.
of the what?
Yeah, so like TikTok, for example, is not about friends communicating. It's just about watching video after video. And sure, there might be some of those videos that friends discuss. However, TikTok's feed is individual. So you may not be seeing the same videos as your friends. So just, if your teen says, I have to be on TikTok because all my friends are on TikTok. No, you don't. No, you don't. Now, Instagram, maybe, but then just strictly limit what they're doing. Like say, I don't know, the parental controls on this change every minute, it seems like. But if there's a way to limit so they're just talking to people they know, that is better than it being opened up. So there's unknown adults communicating with them. And so there's all the influencer content being fed to their explore page and so on. But yeah, communicating with friends, let's preserve that. But let's try to preserve that in a way that then, they're not sucked in by all of this other content that is not really related to communicating with friends.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask you to maybe, share some, closing thoughts with our group here. The question, the last question I'm going to ask is unique to our situation here in Israel. There's been a war going on for many months. Often there's emergencies, and as a result, people sort of want to know what's going on, want to be updated, want to be watching the news, want to be. How do you balance what seems to be a very responsible and reasonable need to get information, which most people are getting, from their phone, versus, getting, I guess, drawn into it, and
Yeah, absolutely. So, for communication with emergencies, those flip phones work perfectly well. For news, I think it has to be a balance. And it also is going to depend heavily on what age are we talking about. Now, if we're talking about a 16 or 17-year-old, yes, they're going to want to be informed. Even there, and even for adults, there is such a thing as too much news, especially when it's so distressing and violent and overwhelming. That we each, I think, have to learn, and we each have to get across to our kids how to walk that line. That we want to know what's going on. We want to be informed citizens. Yet, is it really going to benefit us to watch some of those awful videos? I would argue no, but I'm certainly open to the idea that there's different schools of thought on that, that's debatable. But sometimes we have to put limits on these things for our own mental health. It's a sad reality.
right. So I'm feeling a little, how do you say? I'm feeling a little down just listening to all this, and what an awful impact, and and how people are growing. Can you offer us hopeful news? In all of your study, could you share with us as part of your closing thoughts, hopeful information, whether it's change that you've seen, or that you could share with people who maybe have given up hope, or
So absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. If this adolescent mental health crisis has been caused by the effects of technology and the rise of smartphones and social media, that's actually good news because it means we can do something about it. So many causes of depression are out of our control. Can't help the genes we were born with. We can't help the horrible things, many of the horrible things going on around us. We don't have a lot of control over that, but we can control how we spend our time outside of work and school. And we can help our kids make good choices in that realm as well. And, kind of as an overall philosophy, I've been thinking about this a lot because my most recent book called Generations is about the impact of technology as a whole and on all generations. And overall, I think we should all be pretty grateful to live now with the technologies that we have now, not just smartphones and social media, but faster transportation, better medical care, labor-saving devices. Technological progress has definitely been a net positive. One of the ways it's been a net positive is it gives us more leisure time. 200 years ago, especially being female, one day a week probably would have been doing laundry over a big kettle on an open fire and having to stir it all, right? Probably with a group of other women because it was such an enormous job. I don't have to do that anymore. I throw the laundry in the washing machine and walk away. So we've been given the gift of time with longer lives and more and less drudgery. So what are we going to do with that time? Are we going to spend it with each other? Or are we going to spend it watching endless TikTok videos? I think that's a pretty clear choice. And I think we can talk about that with our teens too, about how we have a limited amount of time on this earth and how are we going to spend it.
Okay, wonderful. I mean, I could share, one of the most meaningful stories I've had here at Crossroads, where someone was very, very depressed and suicidal, and they changed their life around. And I was chatting with them and asking them, what did it? I was waiting for him to tell us that, we were great social workers and we did a great job, which he believed. But what he said to me is what you said. He said it came down to a choice. I had to choose how I wanted to live my life. And really, no one could do that but the person themselves. I guess as parents, we have some control. We could ban something, we could take it away. But at the end of the day, the idea of understanding that we all have a choice, I think, is a very, very powerful one.
Yeah.
And
it's great to put it that way, especially for older teens, where that's something that they're contemplating. That's something they're very interested in. Younger kids, no, just put the boundaries on and make sure that they're not veering off of them. But for older teens, they love having this discussion. It's very front of mind for them.
Right. All right. Well, listen, this was really fantastic. It was a great honor for Crossroads to host you. Thank you. And I want to just, put the message out there to all the parents or people in the community who are watching that if you know of teens who are depressed or anxious or who are struggling or vulnerable, I'm not going to turn my video around, but I'm looking at 15, 20 young people who are having a thrilling time as part of our theater program. But not just that, we also offer free therapeutic support by social workers. We have a crisis hotline if needed. I just shared that in the chat. If there's some way that Crossroads could be helpful, so we, beyond offering future Professor Twenge talks, please let us know. So wishing everyone a good night. Thank you for joining, and thank you again, Professor Twenge.
You're very welcome. Thanks everybody for coming, and great questions. But really liked hearing them. Thank you.